Chapter 1. Why some people seem to just want it. Welcome back to Relearn Way. Get comfortable, dim the lights if you haven't already, and let your body sink into wherever you're resting. Tonight isn't about pushing yourself to learn something new. It's the opposite. Tonight is about understanding something gentle and true about your own mind. So gentle that you can simply let it wash over you while you drift toward sleep. Here's the question we're going to sit with tonight. Why does studying feel almost effortless for some people, like they were simply born wanting it, while for others, even opening the book feels like dragging a boulder uphill? For a long time, the easy answer was talent, or discipline, or just being wired differently. But that's not really what the research shows. What the research shows is quieter and kinder than that. Motivation isn't a personality trait you either have or don't have. It's closer to a set of conditions. Meet certain conditions in your environment, in your beliefs about yourself, in how a goal is framed, and motivation tends to show up on its own, almost automatically. Miss those conditions, and even a naturally curious person will feel stuck. So tonight, we're going to walk slowly through what decades of research actually say about adult motivation to learn. No hustle culture slogans, no shouting at you to just try harder, just the real evidence-based architecture of why some studying feels light and some feels impossible, and what quietly shifts one into the other. We'll move through it the same way we always do here at Relearn Way, one idea at a time, in plain language, resting on real, named researchers rather than borrowed motivational quotes. We'll spend time on what genuinely works, the small, unglamorous mechanisms that quietly and reliably move the needle. And we'll spend a little time, gently and fairly, on a couple of popular ideas that turned out to be less powerful than their reputation suggests. Not to dismiss them entirely, but because knowing the honest picture tends to be more useful, in the long run, than chasing a shortcut that was never quite real. If you fall asleep before we're finished, that's more than fine. That's actually the point. Whatever your mind absorbs tonight, in this soft, half-awake state, it will keep and carry forward. There's nothing you need to remember on purpose, nothing you need to hold on to with any effort at all. Just let the words arrive and let your body do what it already knows how to do. Let's begin. In the 1970s, two psychologists named Edward Deci and Richard Ryan started asking a very simple question. What actually makes a behavior feel like it's coming from you rather than being forced onto you? Over the following decades, that question grew into one of the most well-tested ideas in all of motivation science. It's called self-determination theory, and at its heart, it says something almost disarmingly simple. Human beings have three basic psychological needs. Autonomy, the feeling that you're choosing this, not being pushed into it. Competence, the feeling that you're capable, that you're actually getting better at something. And relatedness, the feeling of being connected to other people while you do it. When those three needs are met, motivation tends to become what researchers call autonomous. It comes from inside you, and it's remarkably durable. When those needs are starved, motivation becomes controlled. It's propped up by guilt, pressure, or fear of consequences, and it tends to collapse the moment the pressure lifts. Here's a story that shows this in miniature. Picture two adult students in the exact same evening course. One was told by her employer, quite bluntly, that she had to complete it or lose her position. The other chose the course herself, picked the specific topic that interested her and set her own pace within the syllabus. Same classroom, same material, same deadline. The first student, motivated by threat, tends to do exactly the minimum required and often forgets most of it within weeks. The second, motivated autonomously, tends to go slightly further than required and remembers meaningfully more months later. This isn't a hunch. In 2021, researchers Howard, Bureau, Gui, Chong, and Ryan pulled together the results from 344 separate studies involving over 220,000 people and found this pattern held up again and again. Intrinsic motivation tracked closely with both success and well-being, and feeling like the material genuinely mattered to you personally tracked closely with something even more valuable: persistence, actually sticking with it. It's a little funny, honestly, how much of adult education quietly ignores this. Mandatory trainings, rigid, one-size-fits-all courses, all the psychological equivalent of trying to make someone enjoy a meal by force-feeding them. And relatedness, the third need, is often the most overlooked of the three, especially for adult learners studying alone, late at night, with no classmates and no cohort. Even a small amount of genuine connection. A study partner checking in once a week, an online community following the same material, an instructor who responds like an actual person, tends to measurably support motivation that would otherwise quietly fade in isolation. So here's a small, quiet thought to carry forward, half asleep as you are right now. If a subject feels like a chore, it might not be about the subject at all. It might simply be missing one of these three ingredients: autonomy, competence, or connection. And each of those, it turns out, can be added back in, gently, on purpose. There's a further layer to Deci and Ryan's work worth sitting with. Motivation, in their model, isn't simply on or off. It sits along a continuum, from fully controlled at one end, doing something purely to avoid punishment or gain approval, to fully autonomous at the other, doing something because it genuinely, personally matters to you. Most real adult learning sits somewhere in the messy middle. You might start a course because your job requires it, purely controlled, and slowly, if the conditions are right, find yourself actually curious about the material weeks later. The goal was never to demand pure intrinsic passion from day one. It's simply to notice which direction you're drifting and nudge gently toward the autonomous end wherever you reasonably can. And competence, the second need, has a subtler side too. It isn't just about being good at something already. It's about the felt sense of progress, however small. A beginner language learner who successfully orders a coffee in a new language, however clumsily, experiences a genuine hit of competence, even though an actual fluent speaker would consider it trivial. That small, real signal of "I did that" often matters more to sustain motivation than any objective measure of skill level. There's a particular kind of adult learner who, faced with a difficult new subject, will quietly try, fail once, and never really try again. And there's another kind who will fail the exact same way and simply try again, a little differently. The difference between them isn't intelligence. Psychologist Albert Bandura spent much of his career studying this exact gap, and he gave it a name: self-efficacy. Simply put, it's your belief in your own capacity to succeed at a specific task. This matters more than it sounds like it should, because self-efficacy doesn't just predict how you feel, it predicts what you actually do. Someone with high self-efficacy in a subject tends to set more ambitious goals for themselves in it, push through difficulty for longer, and recover faster after a setback. Someone with low self-efficacy in that same subject tends to interpret an early stumble as proof they were never cut out for it and quietly stop trying. In 2016, researchers Haneke and Broadbent reviewed dozens of studies specifically on university students and confirmed academic self-efficacy is a meaningfully strong predictor of actual performance. And crucially, they traced why it wasn't magic. Students with higher self-efficacy simply regulated their effort better, processed material more deeply instead of skimming it, and set clearer goals for themselves along the way. Belief translated directly into better habits. Here's the strange, almost comforting part. Self-efficacy isn't fixed. It's built in small pieces, mostly through something researchers call mastery experiences, which is really just a formal way of saying small wins, achieved by your own effort, remembered afterward. Think about learning to parallel park. Nobody feels confident the first time, but after the fifth successful attempt, something shifts quietly in how you see yourself behind the wheel. The same exact mechanism applies to a language, a spreadsheet skill, a new instrument, or the subject you've been avoiding for years. So if you've ever thought, I'm just not a math person, or I'm just not good at languages, here's the gentle reframe research would offer instead. You may simply be a few small, remembered wins away from believing something different about yourself. And that belief, once it shifts, tends to become its own quiet engine. Bandura identified a few other sources of self-efficacy too, beyond your own direct mastery experiences. And they're worth knowing, because they're easier to access than you might think. One is called vicarious experience. Simply watching someone reasonably similar to you succeed at the thing you're attempting. Watching a peer, not a superhuman expert, but an ordinary person, work through the same struggle and come out the other side, quietly raises your own belief that you could too. Another is verbal persuasion. Genuine, specific encouragement from someone whose opinion you trust. Not generic cheerleading, but a real, credible voice saying, I've seen you do hard things before. You can do this one too. And there's a slightly funny, very human wrinkle in all of this. Self-efficacy is often oddly domain-specific. A confident public speaker can feel completely defeated by a spreadsheet. A brilliant mathematician can freeze up entirely at the thought of learning to swim. Believing in yourself, it turns out, isn't one big global trait. It's built, brick by brick, one specific skill at a time. And that's actually good news, because it means low confidence in one area says nothing reliable about your capability in another. There's a fourth source too, one that's easy to overlook because it's less about outside evidence and more about how your body feels in the moment. Bandura called it physiological and emotional state. The racing heart and tight chest before a difficult test, which your mind can interpret two very different ways. Interpreted as anxiety, a sign something is wrong, it lowers self-efficacy. Interpreted as simple readiness, the same physical sensation your body produces before anything that matters, it can actually support it instead. The sensation itself doesn't change, only the quiet story you tell yourself about what it means. Here's a pattern almost every adult learner recognizes, even if they've never had a name for it. Two courses, equally difficult. You finish one, you quietly abandon the other around week 3. Researchers Jacqueline Eccles and Alan Wigfield spent years studying exactly this pattern. And in a comprehensive 2020 update to their work, they described motivation as the product of 2 separate ingredients multiplied together. Expectancy, how likely you believe you are to succeed, and value, how much the outcome actually matters to you, multiplied together. Because here's the important part. If either number drops close to 0, so does your motivation. Even if the other number is high, you can believe completely that you'd succeed at something and still feel almost no pull towards starting if it doesn't feel like it matters to you at all. And value itself, in their model, isn't just one thing. It splits into several flavors. There's interest value, simply enjoying the material. Utility value, seeing how it helps you reach something else you want. Attainment value, how much succeeding at it aligns with who you see yourself as. And quietly working against all 3, cost. The time, effort, and stress it takes, weighed against everything else competing for your attention. This explains something that used to puzzle a lot of workplace trainers. You can hand a genuinely capable adult a well-designed course and watch them drift away from it anyway. Not because they doubted they could pass it, but because nobody ever answered the quiet question sitting underneath the whole thing. Why does this actually matter to me? There's a small, slightly funny irony buried in the research here. The courses that spend the least time explaining why something matters are very often the ones that most desperately need to. Nobody skips the why section of a class they're already excited about. They skip it precisely in the classes that needed it most. So a small, useful question to ask yourself about anything you're trying to learn, gently, without pressure, right now as you're drifting. Not, can I do this? But why specifically does this matter to me? The answer to that second question, research suggests, may predict whether you finish far better than the first one ever could. There's also that fourth, quieter factor sitting underneath value, the one researchers call cost. And it's easy to underestimate how much it shapes a decision to keep going or quietly stop. Cost isn't only about time. There's emotional cost too, the anxiety a subject provokes, and what psychologists sometimes call opportunity cost. Everything else you're giving up by choosing to spend an evening on this particular thing instead. 2 courses can offer identical value, but if one quietly demands far more emotional bandwidth to sit through, adults will drift toward the one that costs less, even if they'd never consciously described their decision that way. Naming that cost honestly, rather than pretending it isn't there, tends to make it easier to manage, rather than harder. And this idea connects back to something Malcolm Knowles, one of the earliest researchers of adult learning specifically, called andragogy, the study of how adults learn differently from children. His central observations, later research suggests, hold up better as useful design principles than as a strict scientific theory, but they're still worth knowing. Adults, he noticed, generally want to understand why they're learning something before they invest in it, prefer a degree of self-direction rather than being told exactly what to do, and bring a lifetime of prior experience that new material needs to connect to rather than ignore. It's worth being honest, gently, that later researchers found Knowles' sharp line between how children and adults learn doesn't hold up quite as cleanly under formal testing as his original framework suggested. Children, it turns out, also respond well to understanding the why behind a lesson, and adults, in the right conditions, can thrive under fairly structured, other-directed instruction too. The useful part of andragogy, most researchers now agree, isn't the strict child versus adult division. It's simply the reminder that relevance, autonomy, and respect for prior experience tend to help almost anyone learn better at any age, which is a gentler, more universal takeaway than the original theory claimed. Most people, when they decide to study more consistently, make a promise to themselves that sounds something like, "I'll study more this week." It feels reasonable. It also, almost every time, quietly fails. In 2006, researchers Peter Gallwitzer and Pascal Sheeran reviewed 94 separate studies testing a very specific alternative, something they called implementation intentions. Instead of a vague intention, a precise, pre-decided plan in the exact shape of, "If this happens, then I will do that." Not, "I'll exercise more." Instead, "If it's 7 p.m. and I've finished dinner, then I will walk for 20 minutes." Not, "I'll study more." Instead, "If I sit down at my desk after breakfast, then I will open my notes for 25 minutes before checking my phone." Across those 94 studies, this simple shift produced what researchers describe as a medium to large positive effect on actually reaching the goal. Not because willpower got stronger, because the decision itself got moved. Instead of relying on motivation to show up fresh, in the moment, competing against a tired brain and a comfortable couch, the decision was already made in advance, in a calmer moment, and simply waiting to be triggered by a cue that was going to happen anyway. There's something almost sneaky, in the best way, about how well this works. You're not asking your evening self to suddenly become disciplined. You're quietly outsourcing the decision to your calmer, more rational daytime self, who then hands it off, already wrapped and ready, the moment 7 p.m. and dinner happen to line up. It's especially useful for exactly the moments that usually derail good intentions: distraction, fatigue, a mind that's already juggling 6 other things. The if-then plan doesn't ask you to fight through any of that. It just waits quietly for its trigger and then runs almost on autopilot. So here's a small, half-asleep exercise. Nothing to write down right now, just something to let float through your mind. Picture tomorrow. Picture one small moment that's already going to happen anyway. A coffee finishing, a commute ending, a specific hour on the clock, and gently attach one small study action to it. If this, then that. That's it. That quiet little sentence has more research behind it than almost anything else in this video. A later, larger analysis, published in 2024, revisited implementation intentions across an even wider net, 642 separate tests this time, and the effect held up again, though the researchers noted something useful about when it works best. The if-then plan is strongest when the then part is genuinely contingent on the if part, meaning you actually only do the action when that specific cue occurs, rather than a vague, general resolution loosely attached to a time of day. And it works noticeably better for people who already have some baseline motivation to begin with. It's not magic that creates desire out of nothing. It's a tool that channels desire that's already there into something that actually happens, reliably, instead of dissolving into good intentions. This also turns out to be especially useful for anyone whose mind tends to wander, or who finds it hard to translate a decision into action, even when they mean it sincerely, because the plan removes an entire decision-making step in the moment itself. There's nothing to decide at 7 p.m. The decision already happened earlier in a calmer, more capable state of mind. Here's a phrase that shows up constantly in classrooms, workplaces, and well-meaning pep talks. Just do your best. It sounds kind, it sounds supportive, and across decades of research, it turns out to be some of the least effective guidance you can give someone. Psychologists Edwin Locke and Gary Latham spent over 35 years studying goal setting, pulling together the results across hundreds of studies, and their central finding held up with remarkable consistency. Specific, difficult goals reliably outperform vague ones, including the vaguest and most common goal of all: simply doing your best. Here's why, in plain terms. Do your best gives your brain no clear target to measure progress against. There's no moment where you can say, "Clearly, I did it," or "I fell short by this much." A specific goal, something like, "I will complete 20 practice questions tonight," gives your mind an unambiguous finish line, and something concrete to feel genuinely proud of crossing. There's a quietly funny irony in this too. The gentlest sounding advice, "just do your best," turns out to be one of the least motivating things you can say to someone, while a seemingly harsher, more specific target actually feels better to achieve, because it's achievable in a way you can actually notice. Locke and Latham's research adds a few important conditions though. So this isn't just set harder goals and hope. The goal needs to feel genuinely achievable, not so difficult it triggers dread instead of effort. You need real commitment to it, not one imposed entirely from outside. And you need some form of feedback along the way. Some way of checking, am I actually getting closer? So here's a gentle contrast to sit with tonight. Instead of a foggy goal like, "I should study more this week," a specific one, like, "I will read 1 chapter and write 5 recall questions from it tonight before I stop." It sounds smaller. It sounds almost too plain to matter. But plain, specific, and finishable, the research says, beats big and vague almost every single time. There's one more piece worth carrying forward here, and it's about difficulty specifically. Locke and Latham's research found that harder goals, within reason, actually produce more effort and better performance than easy ones, right up until the point where the goal starts to feel genuinely unattainable, at which point motivation collapses instead of rising. That's a narrower target than it might sound like. Not set the hardest goal imaginable. Instead, set a goal that stretches you a little further than feels fully comfortable, while still being something you can picture yourself actually reaching by the end of the session. Feedback matters here too, quietly, simply checking, at the end, did I actually hit that target? Closes a small loop in your mind that a vague goal never gives you the chance to close. Here's something that feels deeply counterintuitive the first time you hear it. Sometimes, offering someone a reward for doing something they already enjoy actually makes them enjoy it less. In 1999, researchers Edward Deci, Richard Kostner, and Richard Ryan pulled together the results from 128 separate studies testing exactly this. And the pattern they found has a name now: the Overjustification effect. When you attach a tangible, contingent reward, pay, a prize, a gold star, to a task someone was already intrinsically interested in, their internal motivation for that task tends to quietly shrink once the reward is removed. Here's the mechanism in plain terms. Your mind is constantly, unconsciously, asking itself why it's doing something. Before the reward, the honest answer was, Because I find this interesting. After the reward gets introduced, your mind quietly updates its own explanation. 2, because I'm getting paid for this. And once that reward disappears, the because I'm getting paid reason disappears with it. And the original interest, the one that used to be enough on its own, has quietly atrophied in the meantime. There's a specific kind of story that shows this pattern almost perfectly. Picture a parent who notices their child genuinely loves reading, picking up books on their own for fun. Wanting to encourage it further, the parent starts paying a small amount for every book finished. For a while, the number of books read goes up, but a few months later, the child stops reading the moment the payments stop and reads noticeably less than they did before any money was ever involved. This doesn't mean all rewards are harmful, and the researchers were careful about that nuance. Positive informational feedback, simply telling someone genuinely and specifically what they did well, actually increased both enjoyment and continued engagement. It's specifically the controlling, contingent kind of reward. Do this and you'll get that. That tends to quietly erode what was already there. So, a gentle thought for anything you already enjoy learning. Be a little careful about wrapping it in external prizes. The enjoyment that's already there, research suggests, is usually more durable and more valuable, left mostly on its own. It's worth being fair to the other side of this debate too, since the research community itself hasn't been entirely settled on it. Some later researchers, notably Judy Cameron and colleagues, argued the original effect was somewhat overstated, and that rewards genuinely do help in certain conditions, particularly for tasks someone had little natural interest in to begin with, where there wasn't much intrinsic motivation to undermine in the first place. The safest, most broadly supported takeaway sits in the middle. For something you already find genuinely interesting, tread carefully with turning it into a paid transaction. For something you have no natural pull toward at all, a reward might reasonably help you get started, as a bridge, while you wait to see if genuine interest ever develops underneath it. Here's a belief that's remarkably common, remarkably confident, and remarkably unsupported by evidence. The idea that you're a visual learner or an auditory learner, and that you'll learn best if material is delivered in your matching style. In 2008, researchers Harold Pashler, Mark McDaniel, Doug Rohrer, and Robert Bjork conducted an extensive review specifically looking for evidence that matching instruction to a person's preferred learning style actually improves outcomes. What they were looking for, specifically, was what's called a matching hypothesis. Proof that visual learners do measurably better with visual material, and auditory learners do measurably better with auditory material, compared to the reverse. They found almost no credible evidence supporting it. People do have preferences. That part is real. Some people do say they'd rather watch a diagram than listen to a description. But preference and actual improved performance turned out to be two completely different things. The visual preferring student didn't reliably learn visual material better than they learned auditory material. The preference simply didn't translate into a measurable advantage. There's something a little funny, in a bittersweet way, about how persistent this myth has remained anyway. Surveys of teachers, even decades after this evidence became well known, consistently show the vast majority still believe strongly in matching instruction to learning styles, a comforting, intuitive idea quietly outliving the evidence against it, largely because it feels so obviously true. Here's the actual, better supported alternative, and it's almost the opposite of matching. What predicts learning far more reliably than matching a style is matching the format to the content itself. Diagrams for spatial relationships, words for verbal reasoning, numbers for quantities. Not because of who you are as a learner, but because of what the material actually is. So, here's a gentle permission to let go of tonight. If you've spent years quietly worrying you were studying wrong because you weren't using your supposed learning style, you can set that worry down. The format that helps depends mostly on the subject in front of you, not on a fixed label about who you are. There's an interesting cousin to this myth worth mentioning gently, because it points towards something that actually does work. While matching format to a person's type doesn't hold up, matching format to the material itself, what researchers sometimes call dual coding, combining words with relevant images rather than either alone, does show real, consistent benefit for nearly everyone, regardless of any personal preference. The difference is subtle but important. It's not about discovering your type, it's about giving your mind more than one path to the same idea, a picture and a sentence working together, which tends to help memory regardless of who's doing the learning. There's a phrase that became almost impossible to avoid over the last decade or so: growth mindset. The idea that believing your abilities can improve with effort actually helps you improve. It's a genuinely appealing idea, and the honest, current research picture is more complicated and more interesting than the popular version usually gets credit for. The original concept comes from psychologist Carol Dweck's research, distinguishing a fixed mindset, believing your abilities are largely set in place, from a growth mindset, believing they can meaningfully develop. Early studies suggested real benefits from shifting someone toward the growth version. But science, done properly, keeps checking its own work. In 2018, a large study led by Victoria Sisk directly tested growth mindset interventions on academic performance and found the overall effect, particularly for university-age students, was small, and in some analyses, not statistically distinguishable from no effect at all. Then, in 2023, researchers Brooke McNamara and Alexander Burgoyne conducted an even larger review, examining 63 separate growth mindset studies, covering nearly 100,000 participants combined. Their conclusion was direct. The vast majority of these studies contained meaningful design flaws, and once those flaws were accounted for, the remaining best designed studies showed effects close to negligible. That's not the whole picture though, and it would be a little dishonest to leave it there. Other researchers working with the same broader body of evidence argue the story is more about who and how rather than whether it works at all. Some later analyses found real, if modest, benefits specifically for students already struggling academically or from lower income backgrounds, and specifically when the intervention was delivered with genuine care and fidelity, not as a rushed one-off poster or slogan. So here's the honest, unglamorous version, offered gently without either dismissing it or overselling it. Believing effort can improve you is a reasonable, healthy belief to hold. It's simply not, on its own, the powerful mindset, flips everything intervention it was sometimes marketed as. Like most things in this video tonight, it's one small, real piece, not a magic key. There's a broader lesson quietly hiding inside this particular story, actually. One that applies to almost everything covered tonight. A single popular study or a single appealing idea However exciting it feels the first time you hear it, is rarely the full picture. Real understanding tends to arrive slowly, through many researchers checking and rechecking, and sometimes gently correcting each other's work over years. That's not a flaw in science. That's what makes it trustworthy. An idea that survives that much scrutiny, even if it ends up smaller and humbler than the original headline promised, is usually worth far more than one that never got questioned at all. So here's where we land tonight, gently, gathering up everything we've walked through. Motivation was never really about willpower, or talent, or being born a certain way. It's closer to a set of conditions, quietly working for you or against you, whether your effort feels like your own choice or something forced on you. Whether you've had enough small wins to actually believe you can do this. Whether the work in front of you genuinely connects to something you care about. Whether your plan is a clear, specific, if-then, instead of a foggy hope. Whether your goal is something you can actually picture crossing the finish line of, and a gentle skepticism toward both the shiny promised shortcuts and the rigid myths that never quite held up under real scrutiny. If you've drifted in and out tonight, that's more than all right. You didn't need to catch every word. Whatever settled in this soft, half-awake state, has likely settled in exactly where it needed to. Tomorrow, you're not behind, and you're not broken. You're simply a person whose motivation runs on real, understandable conditions, the same conditions every other person's does. And now, quietly, you understand a little more about what those conditions are. None of what we walk through tonight requires you to overhaul your entire life tomorrow. That's not how any of this actually works. And it was never the promise. A little more autonomy where you can find it. One small, remembered win to lean on. A clearer sense of why something matters to you specifically. One if-then plan attached to a moment that's already going to happen anyway. One specific, finishable goal instead of a foggy hope, and a little less pressure to find a magic method, because most of what actually works was quiet, ordinary, and a little unglamorous all along. Thank you for spending this time with Relearn Way. If tonight helped, even a little, consider subscribing for the next one. Whenever you're ready, no rush at all. For now, let your thoughts get slower and softer and further apart. Let your body rest. Good night.